write the story of our world every day. Listen and your heart may open up. If ever you feel frightened of our world that's washed away, a mother is a mother, come to us. Women, 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 women. Women sew the fabric of our world every day. History of violence made it through. The stories that we share will live on until we say these truths are our gifts passed on to you.
Good evening. I'm Lisa Liebau, the Scheherazade Project's co-founder with Julia Alvarez, and this is the hashtag 101 Nights show. Back on July 25th, we began our countdown with creativity to Election Day 2020. Now we're less than a month away. We set out to have at least 101 women artists sharing stories in any art form, and with your help, we've grown well beyond that. Our beloved community of artists, art lovers, and activists is gaining momentum. Let's use that energy to engage in democracy. Vote, encourage others to vote, drive someone to the polls, or volunteer to count absentee ballots. Here's another way you can nourish the grassroots. Share your YouTube, IGTV, or Facebook links to your favorite hashtag 101 Nights episodes via social media or messages to friends and family. Tonight, we're featuring Susan Fisher Sterling. She is the Alice West Director of the National Museum of Women in the Arts in Washington, D.C. This museum is the only major museum in the world solely dedicated to advancing women in the arts. Sterling has built her career and the stature of the museum around the message of equity for women through the example of excellence in the arts. Among her honors are Orders of Merit from Brazil and Norway, the President's Award of the Women's Caucus for Art, and selection in 2011 as one of Art Table's 30 most influential professional women in the visual arts. It's a pleasure to bring to you Susan Fisher Sterling.
Hello, my name is Susan Fisher Sterling, and I'm the director of the National Museum of Women in the Arts. Today, we live in a world where visual images matter more than at any other time in history, and visual arts has the power to change the way we see. But to work its magic, art must be seen. And for many years, we were only seeing half the picture. For centuries, great women artists have created works of profound meaning and beauty. Yet until very recently, art by women was all but missing from public display, and the stories of women artists were absent from history. My creative endeavor, the National Museum of Women in the Arts, takes up their stories past and present. Founded 33 years ago by Wilhelmina Nicole Holliday and her husband Wallace, we are the only museum in the world solely dedicated to women in the arts. And from our home in Washington, D.C., in a repurposed Masonic temple 2 blocks from the White House, the museum gives prominence to the many fierce women artists who refuse to let society define their place. This evening, as part of the Scheherazade Project, I'd like to share the stories of 4 of my favorite fierce women who are essential to rewriting history in the arts.
So who are some of these women? Let's begin by going back to the 16th century. We all know of the genius of the Renaissance man, but what of the genius of the Renaissance woman? Lavinia Fontana was one such genius. Acknowledged as the first professional woman artist of the Renaissance, she was such a novelty that she painted her self-portrait, often, as you see on the left, to prove her talent so that people could gawk at what a female painter looked like. Self-possessed and refined, she is formidable sitting there at her spinet. Now let's take a look at the commissioned portrait she created on the right. This is most likely the young woman's wedding portrait, chock full of symbols and objects which, if you know how to read them, are the Renaissance equivalent of a neon sign flashing "Your ideal Bolognese bride here." The cross symbolizes piety, the dog loyalty, red the color of the wedding dress in Bologna, Italy. The clothes and gems are typical of a wealthy young woman's trousseau and the symbols of her rich dowry. Having gazed upon this perfect example of demure womanhood, it's safe to assume that our artist Fontana was just like the woman she depicted, right? Actually not. While certainly there are similarities, Fontana did not spend her youth at home or in a convent, but rather apprenticed from a young age in her father's studio. She came to her marriage based on her talent and her earning potential as an artist. She was the primary breadwinner for her family, and her husband, a minor noble, worked as her assistant, managed the household, and acted as her agent. Did I tell you she bore 11 children in the midst of this burgeoning career? Eventually, she became so celebrated that she moved from Bologna to Rome, where she worked for none other than the great Camillo Borghese, who became Pope Paul V. Fontana was truly a Renaissance woman and the artistic equal to the Renaissance man, setting the stage for those who came after her. If Fontana was a 16th century trailblazer, then my next artist of note was a pathbreaker who broke conventions of late 19th century France in oh so many ways that are still important to us today. Opinionated, ambitious, assertive, tenacious, controversial, and unapologetic about her behavior, Sarah Bernhardt was well suited to her calling in the theater. Arguably the most famous actor of her day, it may come as a surprise that she also was a damn good visual artist, and we own one of her most dramatic works. Titled After the Storm, Bernhardt said this work represented a scene she witnessed, that of a Breton peasant cradling her grandson, who had died having been caught in fishing nets during a storm. It's up to you whether to read this image as an image of hope or of despair, but there certainly are similarities to Michelangelo's famous Pietà. However, unlike Michelangelo's figure of the Virgin Mary, the otherworldly female exemplar of chaste piety, Bernhardt depicts an old, powerful, and grieving individual, a person of this world. What inspires me about Bernhardt was her drive to be real and authentic, not just in her sculpture, but also in the way she assumed roles that broke gender and societal norms of her day. She took on leads like Hamlet. She performed Judas in a scandalous production that closed after just one performance. She fostered romantic relations with men and women, perhaps most notably the Prince of Wales and her sister artist, Louise Abema. And she had so many admirers that when she died in 1923, hers was one of the largest funeral processions in the history of France. She lived unconventionally in both life and art, and her secret passion was sculpture. Who knew? Named Time Magazine's 100 Most Influential People in 2018, Judy Chicago declared herself as an artist at the age of 5. What blows my mind is how this rebel with a cause found her artistic calling. In a class at UCLA, one of her professors arrogantly and ignorantly proclaimed that women had made no contributions to history, none at all. This ignited a lifelong mission of Judy Chicago's to prove him wrong. How did she do this? By creating feminist art in 1969, by making a name for herself in the male-dominated art world and by reclaiming women's history. Those became Chicago's intertwined causes. Judy is one of the artists I respect most because she turned the testosterone-driven machine aesthetic of 1960s LA art into works like Pasadena Lifesaver Red No. 4, works that combine personal experience with overtly feminist imagery. These lifesavers mark the beginning of Chicago's use of what's called central core imagery, the representation of female genitalia and, by extension, sexuality through color-filled images. In these spray-painted works, her aim was to create the illusion of shapes that are vibrating, dissolving, opening, and closing. From here, I'll let you draw your own conclusion about why she may have called these images lifesavers. This was the beginning of the artist's long journey to create the iconic sculpture installation known as the Dinner Party, a monumental work of art where great women throughout history are finally given a place of honor at the table. At the Women's Museum, we celebrate Judy Chicago's career up to and including the Dinner Party and the 4 subsequent decades in which she has created art that speaks to women's rights as human rights, including the rights of Mother Earth herself. The final feminist forebear and fierce woman is visual artist and author Faith Ringgold, who may be as well known for her children's books like Tar Beach as she is for her African American story quilts. Ringgold also is justly famous for unequivocally embracing figurative art at a time when abstract art holds sway over the entire art world. Ringgold also became a leader in the civil rights movement as well as the feminist movement, and has fought her entire life for the rights of Black artists to be seen. Faith inspires me because she never took no for an answer and never felt confined by what society, either white or Black society, was telling her to do. She was the first person ever to recommend and organize a protest against a museum for racial and gender bias. It was in the 1960s against the Whitney Museum of Art, which some people called the Whitey Museum of Art. And a few years later, she was jailed for creating the People's Flag Show, a protest against American oppression and repression at home and abroad. Given Ringgold's history as an artist and an organizer, it is especially significant that we have one of her story quilts in the museum, and it's called Joe Baker's Bananas. For those of you who may not know much about Josephine Baker, she was a great performer. And here in Ringgold's quilt, she is performing her famous Danse Sauvage at Paris's Folies Bergère, the dance that established her as the biggest Black female star in the world of the 1920s. In her life and art, Baker was a radical who redefined notions of race and gender through style and performance in a way that continues to echo throughout art, dance, music, and fashion today, from Ringgold to Beyoncé to Prada and beyond. Moreover, she was a civil rights activist. She left the U.S. because of racism in the early years of the 20th century, and once she had established her reputation in Europe, Baker refused to perform in front of segregated audiences when she came back here to the U.S. on tour. She also was the mother of 12 adopted children, known as the Rainbow Tribe, long before Angelina Jolie. In Joe Baker's Bananas, Faith Ringgold foregrounds the issue of racial and gender equity that we all are talking about so much today, in the hope that change will come and the visual arts will help to lead the way. We all know for a fact that contemporary women artists, and especially those of color, continue to face many systemic obstacles and disparities to success, including persistent underrepresentation in museum collections and exhibitions worldwide. The 4 artists that I spoke about today, and hundreds, even thousands of others, deserve to have their stories told. Thank you to the Scheherazade Project for helping us to champion women in and through the arts. Go women and go vote.
Thank you to our featured artists and to you for joining the Scheherazade Project's hashtag 101 Nights. We're fast approaching Election Day and we need all of us to draw attention to it. Please add your voice by posting a photo or video of your story, poem, dance, tapestry, painting, song, any art you wish to share on your Twitter or Instagram account, and include hashtag 101 NIGHTS. In the meantime, if voter registration deadlines haven't yet passed in your state, volunteer to register voters. And of course, go vote, everyone.
Women, 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 women sew the fabric of our world every day. History of violence made it through. The stories that we share will live on until we say these truths are our gifts passed on to you. Women.